And welcome everybody who's here. Welcome everybody who's watching to UCSD. We're always excited to come in here and to do our events. And today we have somebody who I think is so relevant to the students here and to everybody else who's watching. Josh Klein joins us to talk about, I think, a really, really important topic. One, the fun one is about how you become a hacker. And the most important one, I think, today is how you manage your reputation online. So, Josh, it's so great to be with you.
Good to hear.
Okay, I want to start with something really simple, right? Over the last year, we've all been exposed to who's watching us, who's not watching us, what are they paying attention to, what are they not paying attention to. I know none of that surprised you, but tell me, what didn't they tell us that we need to know?
Well, so everyone knows that Snowden came out and told us about the government reading our emails and all that good stuff, which is nice. But to be honest, the U.S. government has a pretty narrow mandate on what they're looking for. I think what's really interesting and what we haven't, as a public, really thought about enough yet is the amount of information that large companies are gathering about us and what they're doing with it.
So give me an example. I know that they're using it. You and I have talked about a lot of examples how they're using our data to promote a lot of things. And some of it is really, really good. But there's also something that really, there's a gray area where it borderlines privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, if you go on Google and you ask for something, you usually are able to find it pretty quickly. That's a great example of the technology being used to our benefit. Or if you go on Amazon, especially these days, you start looking for a product, your ability to find what you're looking for really quickly for the price that you want to pay is excellent. It's a huge value add. So that's all real positive. Some of the stuff that I think we're not as aware of is if you are in a very rich neighborhood and you go online to Amazon to buy toilet paper, you're going to see one price. But if you're in a very poor neighborhood and you go online to buy toilet paper on Amazon, you're going to get another. Now, that in itself is not that interesting. If you go to a local bodega, they're going to have different prices in each neighborhood because in a rich neighborhood, you want to charge higher prices because people are going to be able to and be willing to pay that. And in a poorer neighborhood, they're not. So that's just, adjusting the price to what the local people will pay. What's curious is that sort of dynamic pricing is getting more and more personal all the time. So there was a study, I think it was last year, where they started doing tests on Amazon to see what different pricing would be around, for example, staplers. And what they found is that you got a different price at different times of day, different locations, different browsers, different operating systems. You got a different price based on if you checked back on the site within an hour or within 3 hours. So they were changing the price based on a huge variety of factors, none of which were very personalized. To give you an idea of how personal they can get, Target a few years back decided that what they really wanted to do was convert customers who were going to have kids. Because it turns out that if you're selling a variety of items, it helps to have a customer who is going through a big lifestyle transition because they'll start shopping from you in order to buy whatever it is that they suddenly start needing to buy, and they'll just continue to shop with you to do it. So if you have a kid, your entire life changes. I recently had a kid, I can attest to this. All of a sudden I'm buying stuff I never knew existed before. For cream, don't even want to talk about it. Regardless, so what happened is they thought, okay, well, now how do we figure out who's about to have kids? And they decided they would target, or they would try and to figure out who was going to have a baby, which women were going to be pregnant. And so they went out and gathered credit card records, they got demographic data, they got a bunch of publicly available data, and they also bought some stuff from companies that companies had assessed. And they started sending out flyers to different households within a certain mile radius of their home, of their stores. And what they found was that they could very accurately predict who was going to have a baby within the next 6 to 9 months and who wasn't. And furthermore, if they sent those people advertisements that had stuff for kids kind of hidden in amongst all the other products that were for sale, that they could convert those people to customers pretty quickly.
Well, that created a lot of controversy, right? I mean, we've pretty much heard about the challenges with that, especially with the younger one and her dad getting involved. That's where you really have to be cautious of what line do you cross.
Exactly. And that, I think, is the interesting bit for business people today, because you can get incredibly well detailed or incredibly specific bits of information about people in order to target them, but how much do you want to use that to change the pricing for the goods and services you sell them?
So tell me what concerns you the most about this, and then I want to get into the reputation economics. What concerns you the most, and for people who are sitting here and people who are watching, I mean, what should we worry about?
Well, the problem with all this online tracking of data and whatnot is that you're going to get increasingly hyper-personalized pricing. So if you have a blog about cheese in which you talk about cheese all the time and people really follow it, you can expect to start going online and getting really good prices for cheese because companies will recognize that you're an opportunity to amortize their marketing costs. On the other hand, if I'm lactose intolerant and I only tweet about cheese when I have an incident with it, they're going to charge me double because if you're selling cheese, you don't want me eating your cheese, man. That's a bad deal, right? So over time, companies are going to be providing more and more hyper-personalized pricing, and what we'll see is exactly what we saw with Napster. New technologies are going to start springing up that allow people like myself to go online and borrow your account to make my cheese purchases, or software that lets me pretend to be someone from somewhere else, or to route my transactions to a website to make purchases from someplace else. So that's just an arms race. And that's a waste of everyone's time.
And it is a waste of everybody's time. So undoubtedly, obviously, the internet's changed everything. But one of the first things, and one of the things you have paid a lot of attention to, is this whole notion of reputation.
Right.
Reputation, just as we thought we knew it, what has changed about how we manage our reputation?
Well, all of a sudden, it's got scalable and valuable in a way that it wasn't before. So, for example, Airbnb. It's one of my favorite examples in this field. When you go into Airbnb, you are essentially establishing a relationship with someone that you've never met before and may never meet again, or that you may never meet at all in person, and deciding whether or not you want to go and stay in their home. Now, they're doing the same thing to you, deciding whether they want you to stay in their home. Now, what possibly could enable someone to feel comfortable with that? Right? Like, here's someone from across the world that I will never see in person. I'm going to leave my house, leave my cats, leave my dog, leave, whatever it is, let them come and stay here. And then when they leave, everything will be fine. Right? That's crazy. And yet it's one of the biggest growing .coms around, right? It's huge. It's absolutely enormous. And the reason that it works is that everyone that goes onto Airbnb, first of all, they do a great job of creating an ecosystem in which people provide certain bits of information that signify whether they're trustworthy. But more than that, if I find that you have an apartment that I want to borrow, I can go Google you and get a lot of information about you. And I can figure out whether or not I feel comfortable trusting you in terms of staying in my place or staying in yours.
Josh, so what goes into managing somebody's reputation today, especially the younger generation that's evolving, that's all over social media? Give us some context as how do we start to really pay attention to that?
Well, the first thing you can do is just go Google yourself, right? Like, if you aren't in, yeah, but it's also a pretty good move, right? Like, I assume that when you brush your teeth in the morning, you take a glance to see what you look like. Make sure you don't have any food in your teeth, no toothpaste in your hair, or whatever it is, right? Like, it's kind of a baseline check. It's probably a good idea to do that online, because it's essentially the same thing. Yeah, exactly, as often as you can, because it changes all the time. More important than that, though, is to invest yourself in different communities. And this is where I don't have a magic answer to the question of how do you manage reputation, but one of the things that I've seen differentiate people who are very successful with online reputation systems against people who aren't is the people that are successful participate often with communities that are largely based online, and they do it in a really authentic way. And I think a big reason that matters is that anyone who's grown up online has a pretty good BS detector, right? Like, when Coca-Cola is trying to convince you they really care about water in your hometown, they don't really care about water in your hometown. And that's okay. You understand that. But if they try and make a big pitch and they want you to buy into something that you really don't believe in, it's just not going to happen. And I think that everyone who's been growing up online recognizes this in everybody else. So if you are authentic and you do participate and you volunteer a lot of your time and effort in helping people in online communities that you care about, you're able to generate, call it reputational capital, right? in which you are providing evidence that you're a good guy or a good girl or whatever.
So Josh, are you skeptical when you Google somebody and you don't find at least enough relevant information?
If they're under 60, I sure am. Like there's a certain cutoff where you expect that lack of familiarity with the technology cuts them some slack, right? Like when I don't find my dad on Facebook, I'm all right with that. But yeah, there are a lot of people out there that just don't because they're not that comfortable with technology or that it's not that germane to them. And you don't want to judge them as being bad people or not being trustworthy, but you don't have the same information that you would expect to have. And I think that increasingly that's a disadvantage.
Well, here's something I heard that I want to get your perspective on. I heard this at Davos this year. Somebody said that if something online is free, you're not the customer, you are the product. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Google may not be doing any evil, but they're certainly raking in the cash, you know?
So describe for the people watching and listening, what does that mean? Like, just what is the essence of that? Because that's what's going to change everything.
Well, sure. So let's see. There's a company called, I think, called InfoChimp, sorry. And all they do is suck down every tweet, every Facebook post, every LinkedIn article or update that's possibly available to them. They put it all in a giant database. They normalize the data and they provide an API to it, and they charge a lot of money for people to go and ask questions of it. So if you want to find Caucasian males between the age of 25 and 25 and a half who skateboard on longboards and live in the West United States near an urban area of 50,000 to 100,000 people, but no more or less, and that drink Mountain Dew on Tuesdays, you can find those people. And once you have, you can target them explicitly. You can also figure out what they're saying. You can figure out what they like. You can figure out what they don't like. You can figure out if they've mentioned Mountain Dew more than 3 times in the last 3 years, in which context, if they mentioned it when talking to a male or a female or someone under 65 or over 32. You can find all this information, slice and dice it however you want, and use it to market your product, because that's the way that the internet is monetized today.
And we basically don't have any say-so in it, right? I mean,
no.
Theoretically, we have no say-so in it.
Well, we do, right? When you click that terms of service button, that little checkbox out of the huge mountain of text that they don't expect anyone human to ever read, then you have decided to go for it. So every free, quote-unquote, free service that you use out there, you basically said, right, you'll let me do spreadsheets online. Awesome, thanks, Google. Here's all my information from now until the end of time, which may not be a very good deal.
But what's the alternative?
Very little alternative. So open source software that you use, but it's certainly not networked with it. Google's platforms are. There are for sale packages like Microsoft Office, but then you're using Microsoft Office, and again, you don't have the networking advantages. So there's very little right now. And I think that a big part of it is that people haven't realized that their personal data is really valuable.
Well, one of the things, Josh, that I think one of the biggest insights from your work, especially the recent work, Reputation Economics, is you talk about, the means of exchange, that now your reputation exceeds your financial financial methods in terms of who we trust and who we don't trust. And it makes a heck of a lot of sense today. But hasn't it always been like that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the original way in which human beings conducted commerce. That's one of the things that really struck me in doing research for the book, was that all these new platforms that are out there, Uber, Skillshare, Neighborhood, etc., are essentially enabling you to do what you do now with your neighbors and friends and peers and clubs and groups and whatnot anyway. If my neighbor knocks on the door, asks for a cup of sugar, I'm happy to give it to them. I don't tell them, okay, well, this package of sugar cost me $4. You're taking 1/18 of the package, so you need to pay me 75 cents. You don't do that. You give them a cup of sugar, right? It's called being human. And it turns out that we're really deeply wired for it. What's interesting is that all these online platforms are enabling us to do exactly that, except now we can do it at scale.
Well, speaking of scale, one of the other big insights you talk about is the great majority of the world still hasn't discovered the internet. right? So when
Exactly.
they start discovering it, there are a lot of risks. What are the biggest ones we got to worry about?
Well, so 65.7 of the human race are not online yet. And what's
Which is
really interesting
staggering,
about that,
actually.
oh yeah, it's huge, but it's particularly staggering when you keep in mind that they are about to all come online. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, obviously, but with the way that hardware development has been progressing, which is to say very, very fast, and the way that networked hardware has basically been overtaking everything else, so like tablets, smartphones, etc., the price points being driven way, way down, the amount of surplus hardware that we have is creating overflow in a wide variety of markets. I think it's reasonable to expect that we can see a huge percent of that two-thirds of the human race coming online in the next 5 to 20 years. So when those people come online, the question that I ask is, how are they going to do commerce? Because they have a choice between going down to Citibank and trying to open an account or opening a Bitcoin wallet, right? Those are both viable. The difference is that Citibank, you've got to go in, you need to understand legalese, you need to be literate, you need to have a social security account, you need to have a steady address, you need to be able to fill out a lot of paperwork, you probably have to make a minimum deposit, you need to understand what complex financial instruments like banking, like checking and savings accounts, credit cards, you need to understand what an APR is. They're going to offer you a subprime mortgage. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that's a pretty big barrier to entry to being able to do basic banking. Like the concept of interest is not, it turns out, enormously intuitive to a huge percent of the population. On the other hand, opening a Bitcoin wallet really is. You take your money, you put it into the phone, and then with the phone you buy stuff from somewhere else and it shows up. That's pretty straightforward. And it has a lot of advantages because it's also not taxed. You don't have to wait 5 to 7 days for money that you send to your mom to show up in your mom's account. It happens instantaneously. It's anonymous, so if you're doing something that your local government may not really like, then that's cool, right? And these are all big pluses for a lot of people. The problem, of course, is that it basically undermines every governmental system in the world.
So, but it's inevitable that the future of currency 10 years from now is not going to be what it is today, right? I mean, we agree on that?
Well, it certainly won't be what it is today. The big question is, will it resemble what we have today in any way that we could recognize? Because we're starting to see that the advantages of these cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are really, really large, particularly to the segment of the population that are getting ready to come online here soon. And since they're going to represent the majority of human beings online, they're going to be setting the terms for what the new normal is.
And Bitcoin's not going anywhere?
I don't know if Bitcoin is going to last or if Litecoin is going to last. I mean, there's a bunch of alternatives that are out there for it, but it's a lot like, and again, I come back to Napster. I call it capitalism's Napster moment, right? When Napster first appeared on the scene, it was the first website that let us trade music files back and forth. And at that time, the Recording Industry Association of America could have said, oh, look, our business models are fundamentally changing. We're going to open a website that lets you buy music for $1 a song, and we'll make millions and millions of dollars. They didn't do that. Instead, they went and sued Napster into the ground and shut it down. And of course, the internet then didn't just roll over and say, oh, no more free music, too bad. No. Instead, Bitcoin came along, and we started downloading music, and then we could also download movies really easily. So that was a big plus, right? And so then they started shutting down BitTorrent sites, seeding sites. And so then we got invite-only file sharing clubs. We got better cryptography. We got greater use of VPN. In other words, it was another arms race that went on until Apple, which is a hardware company, came along and said, okay, look, we'll sell you your songs, or actually we'll give you your songs, but we'll wrap it up with a bunch of stuff like integration into social platforms, reviews, cover art, a nice player to play it on. We'll make it native to a whole bunch of different devices, and we'll charge you $1 for all of that. How's that sound? And most people said, okay, cool, I'll go for that. Well, the same thing is now happening with all these online platforms like Bitcoin. I'm sure, China said, we're not going to accept Bitcoin. Well, if you look at the number of transactions that are happening in the world, there are a lot of them that are still happening in China. It turns out, right? And that's because the internet is truly global. So Bitcoin may not last. It may not have enough of the right advantages to really take off in this new ecosystem, but something like it is going to. I think that's a fair bet.
Josh, there are a bunch of companies over the last year or so that took some serious hits to their reputation. You mentioned Airbnb, you mentioned, or you didn't mention Uber. Uber took a big hit, Target took a big hit, but some of them have really used it to rebound and enhance their reputation. What can we learn from that? Because you look at Uber and Airbnb today, they're a lot better off as a result of those incidents.
Absolutely. Yeah, they were, I hate to use the term agile because it's so overused, but I think it's a pretty good explanation for what they've done. In the case of Uber, one of the things that they did that I thought was really smart was to say, look, there's all these markets that we're not going into because there's no legislation about whether it's legal or not. As a result, we're losing a lot of business, and competitors that have less of an ethical stance or less of a, let's say, less of a constituency of users to care about are going in there and buy services. What we're going to do is we'll write our own regulation and adhere to it in all these new markets that we're planning to enter, until such time as local governance creates legislation to decide how we should or should not act. That's really progressive in a lot of ways, because what they've done is they've said that the government, frankly, is just too slow. So we're going to address the concerns that they should be addressing if they were able to operate at the speed of which markets are developing. Airbnb did something that's maybe a better example. Someone went away, they rented out their place to somebody, and they came home and they found that the person that had stayed in the house had smoked a lot of crack and basically trashed the house, right? So everyone's worst nightmare if you are renting out your place to Airbnb. What Airbnb did, and it took them a week, which is a really long time on the internet, but it took them a week, and they decided, okay, look, it's worth $1 million to make sure that our users feel comfortable using our system, so we're going to guarantee your house up to $1 million worth of damage. Now, I'm sure they spent a lot of time with some spreadsheets to make sure that that was a wise investment, but ultimately it turns out to really have paid off for them, because they essentially assured all of their users that they care enough to put their money where their mouth is. So again, should they have thought of that up front? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe they're better off having waited to see what this new market that they've developed really needed and what their users required to feel comfortable. The point is that they didn't say, oh, well, that person smoked crack in this other person's house, but we're not responsible for your drug use. You need to you need to screen the people that are going to stay in your house. They didn't try and bury it. They didn't try and pretend it didn't happen. They didn't just release the billboard. They said, hey, look, this bad stuff happened. Here's what we're doing to address it. And I think that's a really responsible move on the company.
And I think that's the major point to take away is they both responded, they both took action, and they're better off as a result of it. Now, let me ask you a couple more questions, and I'm going to invite some others to ask some questions here. Everybody in this room, lots of people watching, have personal brands. So when someone takes a hit to their personal brands, what can we learn from what these companies have done so well to do personally?
The same exact thing. One of the worst things you can do is pretend that it didn't happen, or try and prevent other people from learning about it. I mean, that just creates the Barbra Streisand effect, right? Where the more you try and prevent people from hearing about it, the more people hear about it. I think especially as we get more used to the idea of being able to find out extensive amounts of information about people online, it gets more and more critical that you conduct yourself in a way that's responsible and respectful and honest. Because if you don't, it's going to come out, and the damage is significant. It's difficult to recover when you've been proven to be a liar.
Josh, is your network today more important than it was pre-internet?
That's a tricky question, because pre-internet, your network would be a lot smaller, right? So much less distributed, but probably more concentrated. I think that with the internet existing as it does today, your network has a lot more potential reach and a lot more potential value. So in that way, it's certainly more valuable than it was before.
Okay, one more question, and then if you guys have some questions, come on up. The term abundance, I think, is overused a lot. The term abundance is used to, it's kind of one of those futuristic terms that lots of people use. When you hear the term and you think of the work that you do, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think a lot of people, like you said, sort of use it in the widespread Pollyannic sense. When I think of abundance, I think of the opposite of scarcity markets. So the way that I like to consider it is the inversion that we saw of the music industry in terms of distribution. It used to be that the only way you could get a song was to buy a 5-cent plastic disc for $15 that had 12 songs on it, and you would hope you needed to buy the one that had the song you wanted on it, right? Now, that the opposite is true. I'm sorry. And when you bought that disc, then that disc was not available to anybody else, right? So if Britney Spears, to name someone who used to rely on CDs quite a lot, if she decided to sell you one of her CDs, then no one else could have that CD. That was it. End of story. That product was now consumed. Now, if you download a song, there are no less copies of the song available to other people. In fact, if you download the song, the likelihood that you'll share the song, that someone else will hear the song, that someone else will want to hear the song, make another copy of the song, is greater. So the opposite effect happens. Instead of that product being consumed and no longer existing, the likelihood of it existing even more than before is greater. So you get the opposite of scarcity. You get abundance.
Very, very intriguing. You guys have any questions? Come on up here and ask him a question. We'll take a couple of questions, and then I'll close with one question of my own, Josh. Just coming up, introduce yourself and ask the question. You're looking right in the
There we go. All right, good afternoon, Josh. Thanks for taking your time to be with us today. I am a first-year MBA student at Rady. Also spent 7 years active duty in the military. I'm still in the reserves with the Navy. I have a very light footprint online, and I don't share much. It's pretty much just my LinkedIn profile and then my page. And it seems from, and I know work with the military is a little bit different, but also from my friends who are in business and the network that I've made so far, it seems that there's almost, in my network, that it's almost more advantageous to have less and have what you, but still be accessible and have what you have be, pretty succinct, pretty professional, and make sure you have no drunk pictures, right? So what are your thoughts on that as far as the amount that you share versus just having a presence?
Well, having and maintaining an online brand doesn't mean the same thing for everybody. For a long time, the sole width and depth of my work was IT security, and I was in a position kind of like you described, right? The less you could find out about me online, I needed to publish some goals and have some information put out to be available about me, so people could get some information about me. But I think it just comes down to what do you need your personal brand to be? What do you need it to represent? And then go about involving yourself with people online in such a way that they can get the information that they need to make an assessment of you. And I don't think that means zero information, but it also doesn't mean, as you said, that you have to post pictures of yourself getting drunk at a bar. That I don't think helps. Well, I'm sure it helps some people, but I don't think it helps that many.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Josh. Again, thanks for talking to us today. My name's Robin. I'm a second-year MBA candidate at Rady. And you touched on sort of file sharing, BitTorrent, and so that, I'm probably still using torrenting more than I should do. And so I'm just wondering, do you think it's ever going to catch up with the end user? We know there's been a couple prosecutions in the last couple of years, but nothing big, still a huge business, huge websites. The UK banned Pirate Bay, but people can still get to it. Do you think we should be worried? Should I be stopping downloading music, etc.?
Well, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, right? So just to throw that one out there. It's one of those questions which is essentially moral, because right now what you're describing is illegal, but it's also becoming the cornerstone of most developing markets. right? The ability to share information freely is becoming an essential component of how most people are conducting their marketing campaigns, and it's becoming widely recognized to be fundamental to how information about products is distributed. So it's illegal right now. So from that position, from that perspective, you shouldn't be doing it. It's also enormously widespread, as you noted. It's hugely convenient, and it's very helpful in terms of making you a better consumer in lots of ways. So you tell me whether you should do it or not.
But do you think it'll catch up to us? Do you think they'll ever have the ability to go after such a huge user base? I mean, this is probably I'd put it in sort of 30 to 40% of the millennial generation have at one stage or another have committed that type of fraud. Do you think they'll ever have the ability to do it?
More than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it is more than that. I don't know if they will have the ability, or if they have the ability to do that now. The thing that strikes me as more interesting is whether they would want to. Because if let's say the music recording industry decided to get really serious and issue warrants for the arrest of everyone that they've ever decided has illegally stolen music, I mean, can you find a better way to alienate your consumer base? I mean, when everybody you know has been threatened to be sued by a particular company, how profitable do you think they're going to be?
Yeah,
so from that perspective, not so much. I expect that it will continue to be contentious over time because it's essentially taking a large, entrenched, extremely profitable and very, very well-funded industry and whacking it about the head. They sort of took it out behind the shed there. But it's going to have to change eventually. Will there be casualties along the way? Yeah. Are they going to try and do more and more dramatic things to make it stop? Sure. Will it? No.
Sure. Cool. Thanks very much.
Josh, we could talk forever about this. I think these are really relevant questions. I know that's what these people are thinking. So let's just end with one simple question. Tell me what concerns you the most about the direction we're heading.
The thing that I often wake up worrying about at night is that all the information online and used to hyperpersonalize that whole ideology is shifting offline. There are companies that are looking to put sensor nodes on every light pole, including cameras to track your eyes, microphones to listen to everything you say, sensors to determine what your heart rate is, your eye dilation, your breath rate, when you say those things, what you're looking at, when you have a certain response or when you say something else. All that information is being captured, but in a way which is essentially closed. Right now, our government, our companies, us as consumers are not considering what the long-term ramifications of all that data collection is, and we need to be.
Well, and that's the great thing of having somebody like you, because it seems like you're onto something that's not going to go out of style anytime soon. For those who want to learn more about what you do, tell them where you want to go.
You can check out more about me at www.josh.is, or you can learn about my book at reputation-economics.com.
Thank you, sir. To be continued.
Thanks very much.